Western Connecticut was the talk of the housing market for a while. Many people leaving New York City looked at the Gold Coast for more space and easy access to the city, as work from home became the norm. But the area is so much more than a bedroom for the Big Apple's workers. Francis Pickering, Executive Director of the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, joins us to talk about the work the COG is doing and how the area is thinking about the future. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor, Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is a Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Francis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you are the third director of a regional council of governments that we've had on the show so far, but we'd like to ask each of them as they come on to just kind of explain to people who might not really understand sort of the structure of these organizations, what a COG does, how does it function, and how does it kind of relate to what some people think of as like county structure?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. Councils of governments exist in many states, but council of governments as they're established in Connecticut are a bit different than what people may be familiar with. Mm-hmm. So as many of the listeners may know, Connecticut eliminated county government in 1959-1960. And at the same time county government was being eliminated, and it was never a very strong county government in Connecticut, at the same time it was being eliminated, there was a recognition that often we are stronger together, that local control is a great thing, but sometimes we have strengths in numbers, and there are opportunities for towns and cities to work together to achieve shared goals, to address shared concerns. And so in the 1950s, 1960s, as county government was on the way out, the predecessors of today's councils of governments were formed. Back then they were called regional planning agencies, now we call them councils of governments. And the primary difference essentially is how they're governed. A council of governments comprises the mayors and first selectmen of a region. So the board members, the 18 mayors and first selectmen I work for, are directly elected by their residents. Mm-hmm. And when they are elected to be a mayor or first selectman, they're also elected to run the COG.
Okay.
Compared to a county in other states, under Connecticut state law, we can do anything a city or a town can do. Mm-hmm. We are considered programmatically comparable to a county. Okay. But the big difference between us and a county is that we are not a separately elected body. So the Council of Governments, the 18 chief elected officials I work for, sit on the COG by virtue of being elected locally. And as a consequence of that, we don't see some of the turf wars you might see in another state. You don't see where the county executive is going one direction and communities are going another direction. People represent their communities on the COG board. So we see a very strong alignment. There has been some talk over the last couple of years about something called county equivalency. It's been maybe a passion of mine for the last decade or so. When policy is made in Washington, when bills are made, they're made for the entire country. New England's a bit different without having county government. So many bills, grant programs say eligible entities, participants, applicants, grantees are counties. Because we don't have counties, that sometimes puts us at a structural disadvantage. Exactly. And so I said, well, this seems a little nonsensical. We should get as much money as we can. Connecticut has a pretty disadvantageous balance of payments issue with the federal government. We send a lot more in on a per capita basis than we get back in federal revenues. And I looked into it, and we aren't the only state in the country that doesn't have county government. But in most parts of the country where there is no county government, the Census Bureau recognizes a regional entity as what it calls a county equivalent. Okay. It could be an independent city, a parish, an organized borough. And we were somewhat unique in not having any county equivalent. So what's happened the last couple of years is we've gone through a federal rulemaking, which is set to conclude probably in September, where the COGS in the future will be regarded by the Census Bureau and by all the federal agencies that defer to them for geographic determinations as a county equivalent. That won't change anything under Connecticut state law. won't change traditions of home rule and local control.
But just for federal grants, things like that that are based on the county system, it'll help out there. Would that incorporate some of the ARP funds and stuff, or does that relate to some of that?
No, that predates all of this, so that actually won't be affected. But what it will do is, this has happened to me personally in the past. When we've applied for a grant, I've had a grantor say, "Love your application, but you're not eligible." That won't happen anymore. So that's a plus for the state of Connecticut. The more opportunities we have to ask for federal assistance, which is ultimately our money we paid in taxes, the better it is for the states.
Yeah, the other states that do have that kind of government still can kind of tap into.
Absolutely.
So could you tell us a little bit about what towns incorporate your council of governments? Like, what's your region like?
Well, I should mention our COG is not incorporated. We're established under the general...
not incorporated, sorry, use the word.
Yeah, yes.
Who's included?
Included, yes. We have a wonderful set of towns. We have 3 central cities, Stamford, Norwalk, and Danbury. We're the only COG in the state to have 3 large cities, which present some unique challenges. Being polycentric, but they're all very diverse, very dynamic, wonderful places to live and do business. And we have 15 surrounding communities, suburbs from 60,000 down to about 2,000 people.
So basically Fairfield County.
We have the western part of Fairfield County. We have 16 of the 23 towns in Fairfield County. We have 2 towns in Litchfield County.
Excellent.
So we go as far north as New Milford and as far northeast as Newtown. And on the coast, we go from Greenwich to Westport and everything in between.
That's a good selection you've got going there. I think probably for that region, one of the kind of biggest stories to come out of the pandemic in the last year has been that home sales in that area specifically, but Connecticut in general, went through the roof. The median price in some municipalities increased in the hundreds of thousands, according to the Connecticut Mirror. What's been the impact of this in your area? Have towns come to you asking kind of what to do with the extra people? Has it been a welcome thing? What's the vibe?
Well, Connecticut, Fairfield County and southwestern Connecticut grew historically. It wasn't a large manufacturing area, unlike other parts of the state. We don't have big rivers, and we really grew most dynamically in the 20th century as people and business migrated out of New York City. So this New York City to southwestern Connecticut, western Connecticut migration is nothing new. It's just the speed at which it happened. And the other change is that we never really recovered from the Great Recession. Other parts of the country saw their home values bounce back in much shorter order. Ours were still depressed for quite some time. So this has been a welcome resuscitation of our housing market. And it's brought in a lot of talent, a lot of capital, and really shown what a dynamic and desirable place that the region is to live in. Obviously, it has created some challenges. Where jobs are plentiful, housing tends to be in shorter supply because people migrate to where there's opportunity, and that's been a historic challenge, not just for southwestern Connecticut, but for many major metro areas. And this has, to be frank, exacerbated that challenge. Partly it's due to people relocating out of New York City, but a lot of it is factors that I would suggest, may be somewhat transitory. So a lot of purchase of second homes. Whether those second homes become primary residences or vice versa, we don't know. Whether people hold on over the long term, we don't know. Policies such as the eviction moratorium, while they have delivered a critical relief to households that have been battered by the pandemic, they also create more tightness in the housing market. And so as we see the economy normalize, we really don't know which direction it's going to go. I would expect to see home values to moderate over time, but we don't know what the time frame for that is.
Do you see this as kind of increasing the importance and need for affordable housing in some of these communities?
Affordable housing is a need everywhere. We strongly support a diversity of housing stock, and we were very involved in this last year in helping to advance legislation that supports affordable housing. But the major challenges here are, there's a lot of talk about zoning, but we have challenges in terms of labor. It's very hard to get cost-effective labor, especially in the trades. We don't have the talent pipeline we need right now. Materials are very expensive. Land is in short supply. Where land is available, transportation is inadequate to get people to and from work. And then, of course, the big question mark is, what is the future of the New York City commute? Are we going to be more, work from home 3 days a week, go in 2 days a week? We don't know. So I would be reluctant to make long-term policy suggestions for something that may be a short-term situation.
And I really see where things land when the dust settles. But you did mention some commuting and transportation issues. We always say here that the roads don't end at the town border, so it's really a regional sort of issue. And in your region, you kind of really have it all. You have some really rural areas all the way to very dense urban sort of places. So you really have a range of issues related to transportation. With the new infrastructure bill coming out, what are some of your hopes for the region? I'm thinking that Metro North and 95 corridor are big parts of your concerns. What are you thinking as related to that?
Absolutely. One of the best things we can do for Connecticut is to improve transportation, because transportation is literally, it's not just an engine of mobility, physical mobility, it's an engine of economic mobility. So when we look at our systems, what we've seen, and this is not a criticism of the current or last couple of governors, it's a very long-term challenge. We've seen a lot of underspending on transportation. And if you look at the cross-section of I-95, it's been 6 lanes. We've added a couple auxiliary lanes here and there, but it's the same capacity it was, more or less, as when it was built 60 years ago. But we've seen tremendous population economic growth. Metro North is still operating on infrastructure from the 19th century. So the infrastructure bill may be a down payment, but it doesn't actually get us to where we need to be in terms of 21st century world-class infrastructure. Now, broadband may reduce transportation demand to the point that we don't need as much asphalt. So we really
hope be connected to their job, the city, by that fiber optic, not necessarily by the merit anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Fiber optic to the home and to the business, and widespread rollouts of 5G could really prove transformative. But looking at our highway system and our transit system, what I would say that we need to look at capacity enhancements in our highway system. We need to look at how we can achieve more efficiency. So the number of lanes is one thing. Another issue is the off-freeway congestion. A lot of intersections have not been looked at in years. Can we optimize the signals? Can we replace them with the roundabout? Can we make small changes that deliver a very large improvement? I believe yes, and in fact, the COG is about to embark on a regional congestion study, which will look at congestion holistically across the region and identify locations that lend themselves to cost-effective interventions. So where are the hot spots that we can actually, like the trigger points we can massage out in the region?
Get the most for their money,
Absolutely. Right now, it's a large system. We have 620,000 people. If you were to say, where are the top 5 areas, we don't know because it's that complex, but our goal is to get to say, here are top 20, our punch list of things we want to fix. On the transit side, reliability, speed, and of course the branch lines are a fantastic resource. There really is the potential to address many concerns about lack of land, high housing costs by connecting to areas inland that would welcome more development, where there is the ability to develop at a much lower cost.
Yeah. One thing with transportation that's been kind of a big push lately has been for greener, cleaner modes of transportation. Some people are saying that the future is electric cars, but those obviously still take up room on a highway. And because batteries are heavier, they wear down roads a little bit quicker. What kind of investment we need to make for work where everyone drives?
That is a challenge. So when I look at Connecticut, we see commutes that are very 1950s in some ways, right? People commute one direction in the morning, they commute the other direction in the evening. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you look at metro areas around the country, you see much more of a pattern where people are commuting every which way. There's no dominant pattern except that people are all crossing. Connecticut, having this more old-fashioned commuting pattern, is largely a function of a spatial mismatch between housing and jobs. So much of the state has underperformed economically relative to its neighbors, relative to Boston and New York. The Hartford area has just not grown at the same rate. Jobs have not been created. Jobs have not been improved at the same rate. And so we see people having to travel farther and farther afield for gainful employ. And if you look at census data, over the last 10, 20 years, people are increasingly driving to southwestern Connecticut and the New York City metro area for work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we love that there's economic development. We welcome the wide open arms. That's fantastic. And it does help support the state of Connecticut. The problem is when you have all of those jobs, all that growth occurring in one area and not somewhere else, you create inefficiencies.
Yeah.
One of those is the extremely high pressure in housing in southwestern Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is that the extremely high pressure or demand on our transportation system.
Mm.
If you were to distribute economic growth more evenly throughout the state, people would not have to drive an hour to get to work or an hour and a half. They could live and work in the same town. And so what we really see is a lot of lost opportunity in the rest of the state. You know, this is not faulting them. It's just saying there's tremendous opportunity there. And I think one way to address this is to help foster economic growth in other areas, which will relieve demand on our transportation system and also relieve demand on our housing.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of, you've almost got too much of a good thing in your area. You like to kind of spread out the good and the burden that some of those things bring as well.
Absolutely. You know, we want to share our good fortune because what's good for our region is good for the rest of the state. We should all be enjoying economic growth.
Excellent. So we talked a little bit about the intersection of green technology and infrastructure. And in your newsletters, you provide lots of information about things like Sustainable Connecticut, Trail Finder, Connecticut workshops. We can talk about those each individually, but with a decent-sized coastal area and a lot of kind of beautiful green spaces, how important are green measures and preservation to your area?
They are vital for a couple. One, obviously, is people love green spaces. There's a lot of medical research out there showing that the more time you spend with nature, the healthier you are. It's great for mental health in particular, and we know over the last 18 months it's been a very stressful time.
We've all become big fans of outdoors and fresh air.
Absolutely. It's an hour in nature is fantastic if you can swing it. But setting that aside, and it obviously has, besides quality of life, economic advantages. If we look at where people have been moving, for the last 20, 30 years, we've heard about, wow, Connecticut has this brain drain, woe is us. Well, Connecticut's a great state. I'm still here, and I'm from Connecticut. Actually, I left and came back. People have left for large cities, but they've also left for areas that have outdoor amenities. And we have fantastic outdoor amenities, such as our Blue Blaze Trail system, 827 miles statewide. Not many states can lay claim to something like that.
Yeah.
Everywhere in Connecticut is at most a 15-minute trip to somewhere you can go into the woods, which is, we don't market it, but that's the reality. On a more scientific, environmental note, we are in the Boston-Washington conurbation. The eastern part of the state has the last green valley, but green spaces are endangered. They're under tremendous development pressure, and they're critical not only for habitat, but for resilience against climate change. Trees keep temperatures down. You can reduce your air conditioner load tremendously by having trees shading your house, for instance, deciduous trees. Green spaces are critical to help absorb rainwater, to absorb what would otherwise be runoff, and to prevent floods. If we look at what's going on in other parts of the country, the more we can preserve nature, the better it is, because nature provides what are called ecosystem services. There are two ways to handle the flood. Actually, there are three. One's to be flooded, which we don't want. The other two ways are you build a lot of very expensive hard, so concrete infrastructure, and you've got to pay continuously to maintain it, or you let Mother Nature handle it.
Yeah.
And so we look at it from air quality, water quality, resilience against climate change. The more we can live with nature, the better it is for our communities.
And I guess towards that end, you had an intern come in and help your towns and cities over the summer with the Sustainable Connecticut, Sustainable CT efforts. And 13 out of your 18 towns are participating in that program, with 11 already being certified. What are the benefits to your area of the Sustainable CT program? Are you encouraging towns that are not in it to join?
Absolutely. In a number of towns, they are not yet. They're on the verge of joining. So our interns, Liam and Valentino, are fantastic. Liam is still with us. The program has been, I would say, an unmitigated success. And it really helps focus attention on sustainability at the local level. A lot of people come in and say, they're focused on one item. I like electric vehicles, or I like green roofs, or I like some type of social service that's very specific. Yeah. Sustainability is really all-encompassing. It's a three-legged stool. It's environmental, social, and economic. And Sustainable CT has given municipalities a guide for how to become more sustainable. And our region has been very involved. The towns that have been involved, usually it's not for a lack of interest, it's a resource constraint. Because municipalities do so many things and sustainability is such a broad concept, it's not like you can simply go in and stick a dipstick in and say, okay, I'm sustainable. You really have to evaluate all of your operations. And that takes time. And right now, municipalities are very busy with COVID response, economic development. And I'm not trying to make an excuse. I'm just saying they don't have the bandwidth. But if they did, I guarantee we'd probably have all 18 on board and certified.
I hope we'll get there at some point.
I do too.
Definitely. And it sounds like the program kind of offers a framework, a structure to kind of evaluate these different projects. And it sounds like a lot of these kind of things were already happening in these towns, just kind of separate little pockets of people having one thing that they like, and this kind of helps a town bring them all together into sort of coordinated efforts.
Exactly. And so there are two aspects. One is it's an inventory of what you're doing. It brings it all together in one place. Very, very valuable. And the town is discovering internally, wow, we didn't know that we were doing all these great things. But also, it helps show towns what they could do better. So I would say, generally about 80% of what they get points for, they're already doing. It's the other 20% they say, oh, here's where we can improve. And of course, going from bronze to silver and potentially one day to gold, it's further improvement. It's benchmarking, it's competition. And what I've been told is that real estate agents love it because it's a badge of pride for the town. This is a green place to live.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Yeah. And think about those green spaces, and I don't think we often think of them as infrastructure. We kind of think of as roads and infrastructure as being a separate thing, and green space being a different thing. But the green spaces do need infrastructure. They need parking lots, bridges, that sort of so on. What are your towns doing to support sort of the development of green spaces, trails, and such?
So Connecticut's somewhat unique in this. If you look at Western states, a lot of the trail maintenance and facility development is funded by federal agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. We don't have that in Connecticut. Our landscape is highly fragmented. It's been in private hands for centuries. But we are the beneficiaries of very strong land trusts. And the land trusts work with their communities, and largely the trails and trail facilities are volunteer built. We have tremendous civic engagement, and I applaud that. We are very cautious about pushing government into areas that civic society is already delivering on, because we don't want to dissuade volunteers from all the wonderful work they do. But the towns, we have a couple of applications coming before us this week to buy more land, to preserve as open space, to expand existing holdings. And that's largely what we do. We rely on our volunteer corps, whether it's Connecticut Forest and Park Association, Land Trust, the New England Mountain Biking Association, the Connecticut Horse Council. They all play a vital role in protecting and developing these areas.
When you talk to your constituents about this, you kind of let people know about the Trail Finder. How's it used, or how used are the trails and green spaces in your area? Do they get a lot of traffic?
It is very varied. So it's yes and no. I think what we saw in COVID was there was a crush last year, and people said, wow, I can't go to the bar. I can't even go shopping. What am I going to do? I'm going to spend some time outside, walk the dog, or just enjoy nature. And certain parks, often state parks, such as Hammonasset or Sherwood Island, are very well known, and they can be victims of their own popularity or success. But so there is
the big name places that everyone kind of has on the top of their head. They're like, I'll go to this, but there's all these other ones that we don't necessarily know about.
There's a plethora of, and some don't even have trails. The state has a number of state forest holdings where you can go, but what will you do except stalk around the woods because there are no trails? Still, it's wonderful. So what we hope the Trail Finder does is publicize more opportunities out there. Not just go to Sherwood Island for the day, but hike, kayak, mountain bike, camp out, develop more outdoor interest, connect with more places, potentially become a volunteer or donor, support the places out there. The Trail Finder is a relatively new development. There are private sector models for it, MTB and Hiking Project, also Trail Forks. Some of those are pay to play, and they don't really focus on Connecticut. And I think this is a really important part of branding Connecticut. Connecticut to me is sometimes like a buffet. It's not the best individual dish of any specific thing, but you get a little bit of everything, and it's pretty tasty, and it's affordable for the most part. So I think that's what we're trying to say is, look, Connecticut's not just Sherwood Island. It's not just a leafy suburb. It is so much more, and the Trail Finder will become a great marketing tool for the state, as well as a great tool for state residents to discover more about what their state has to offer.
People to discover what they might not know of in their own town already, like this right next door even.
I have discovered so much in Connecticut and using apps similar to Trail Finder. I had no idea what was out there, and it's just wonderful.
That's great. So another program, Resilient CT, that was held through UConn, did workshops with in a couple of COGs, including yours. And some of the towns in Connecticut are increased risk for flooding due to global warming. But kind of anyone that's paid attention to recent worldwide news knows that there's not really any place that's not affected by global warming at this point. Was the information that you learned through these programs surprising? Do you know of any plans going forward to deal with some of the information that was covered in these?
So I have a background in environmental management, and it was not surprising because I've been following this for a couple decades. Those of us who follow this know what's going to happen. The projections don't really seem to change. If anything, they're accelerating, but that's about it. We will see coastal flooding and storm surges. We will also see that on rivers. People forget about rivers because once the water rises, the bathtub rises, it rises everywhere.
So it's not just the Gold Coast; it could be all the way up the Connecticut River, even into Windsor Locks.
It could be up the river. Now, the good news is much of our coastal plain, at least plains on the river, are well preserved. They're used for farming, so there might be farming losses, which is unfortunate, but they're not heavily developed in many places. The challenge for us is not going to be forest fires. It's just going to be more precipitation and both in intensity and in frequency. And there are solutions. A lot of it involves it's increasing our pervious surface, right? So reducing the amount of asphalt, reducing lawn, planting more trees, more bushes, everything to slow down and absorb water. But when you're in a low-lying area, there really are not good solutions. There are engineered solutions that require maintenance. But seawalls, for instance, can create erosion in other places. They really despoil the coastline. The reality is some properties are not going to survive in their current form. And we don't have a solution for that. And nobody has that because that's really wrenching. That's people's homes and their livelihoods.
But some of these places that were maybe built in floodplains or something that, every time there's, when it's Hurricane Sandy, the other hurricane hits, you always see these sort of areas getting hit again. Some of these may just not in the future be viable places.
They're not. A lot of them will not be viable places. The good thing is Connecticut has, we have not witnessed the rash of coastal development that we've seen, for instance, in Florida, or of fire-prone area development we've seen in the Intermountain West, right? So being a slow growth state, we haven't seen housing being pushed and business being pushed into marginal lands. That's a good thing in that regard. And we are working at the COG. There are federal funding programs, some opportunities right now that are very attractive that provide the lion's share of a buyout for properties that are at risk. So we are exploring that too, but we don't really have easy solutions. The solutions are two, there's adaptation and there's mitigation. And adaptation is going to mean some people are going to have to move, hopefully as few as possible.
We talked a little bit about how, we saw an influx of people moving into the state in the last 18 months or so. With this influx of new residents, what are towns doing to kind of make people that move here want to stay? Say, hey, check out Connecticut. This is what we have here. This is why you want to stick around now.
Well, I think we already do a lot. So we have all manner of festivals in the summer. We have farmers markets, we have outdoor theater, we have performances. There's a lot going on in Connecticut. As I said before, we don't always publicize it very well. 2 towns over, there might be a fantastic theater performance series going on, and you don't know about it. So, but the residents do know about it. So we do offer a lot. We have fantastic schools, safe communities, good quality of life. What people were fleeing in New York City, they were not fleeing a shortage or a deficiency of things to do, right? They're not fleeing and saying there are not enough bars and restaurants. What they were relocating from was partly maturity, millennials coming of child-rearing age and starting families and saying, you know what, I would rather do this in Connecticut than New York. But a lot of it was a reaction to what happened in New York City. When businesses were shut down, there were simply not opportunities to enjoy oneself. People don't have yards. They don't have parks in the same way we do. And they came here for that. And we don't close. We've kept those open to our credit. So I think a lot of what's drawn them here is still here, and we just have to take care of it. What I would say may keep them here is stability. So right now, New York is going through some wrenching transformations politically, as we've all seen the last couple of weeks. But if you look at the reports out of New York City about public safety, for instance, they're not in a good place, and it pains me to say that. But when you look at Connecticut, we have not seen the same increase in criminality. Our state is doing, at least over the short term, quite well financially. Our taxes are stable. It's really a different situation than what you see in New York City. When people buy a home, it's often the largest investment in their life. It becomes a source of savings and intergenerational wealth. And they work really hard to choose a home and a location that they believe will deliver a return on investment, while providing good life. And I think the more Connecticut can show that we are a beacon of calm in a gusty, turbulent sea, the more attractive we will be.
I agree.
And we've done very well the last couple of years. So the credit of the administration, we've done a fantastic job of projecting an image. Before 3-4 years ago, we were making news. What's wrong with Connecticut? Nowadays, the news coming out of Connecticut is almost exclusively positive, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Between our pandemic response, where we were one of the first states to kind of help, or possibly kind of help us turn the corner a little bit, and just an oasis of calm in a crazy world, I think has been a big selling point for Connecticut in the last 18 months.
And our response, I really credit everybody involved. We did not overreact as some states did. We took a very scientific approach, and we kept what could stay open. And I think that made a huge difference to the economy and also the quality of life and people's feeling about themselves.
Yeah, not just kind of black and white decisions, but really nuanced things, really looking at the data to see the right balance of safety versus all the other concerns. A lot of plans, certainly, that were around before the pandemic got put on hold in the last year and a half. Is there anything that you're looking to get back to in the future that you weren't able to tackle during this period?
Well, that's actually not been our experience because Westcott continued operating. We switched over to remote work from one day to the next and had no disruption to ourselves. So that was I don't think we've been disrupted. What I would say is our workload maybe doubled and a lot of long hours for staff, for our staff, and also for my bosses. That mayors and first selectmen have really gone above and beyond this last year, and I think the results show for themselves how hard they've worked. We have a lot of projects coming up that weren't necessarily delayed by the pandemic, but just it's the natural project development pipeline. So I mentioned before, regional congestion study. We also have a regional broadband study, look at fiber to the home and broader 5G. We are working on, we've just released a report on riparian zoning regulation to address Long Island Sound water quality issues. We have a regional affordable housing report coming out because we recognize that housing is not local, it's regional, just like job markets are regional, so are housing markets. We have a lot of materials coming out, quiet zone study from the New Canaan branch line, a study on how to develop revenue to fund improvements to the Danbury branch line. a lot of assistance with their towns in the American Rescue Plan Act program. There are a lot of projects that are in the pipeline or are wrapping up right now. Some may have been delayed a month or two by COVID, but really nothing
really got put on the back burner too much.
No, we've kept our foot on the gas.
Excellent.
Right, so we've kept our foot on the battery in this case because we're green, right?
Very, very green. Well, Francis Pickering, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, and have a great day.
And keep up the good work in Western Connecticut.
Thanks, you too, at CCM.
We'd like to thank our guest, Francis Pickering. I'd also like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNKH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.